Hi, everybody. I'm Vinod Thomas. Watching this video, you might know me, might not. Uh, but it is Friday, April 3rd. The last week's been kind of rough for me. It was this past Sunday. I found out about late at night, I found out about the passing of my good friend, Isaac Robinson. William Isaac Robinson, a state rep in Michigan, representing part of Detroit. And we're in the middle of the coronavirus crisis in the U.S. right now, and that's what cost Isaac his life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about him, to say a few words to people who knew him, people who didn't know him. If you didn't know who Isaac Robinson was, you missed out on a great experience because he was incredible. Uh, Part of the reason I'm making this video, I don't know if I'm going to get a chance. Normally, I would, somebody passes away, you go to their funeral and ask to say a few words. The way this whole coronavirus thing's going, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to go to his memorial service. I don't know if because the travel restrictions are in place now. We're not supposed to have large gatherings. I'm probably not going to get a chance to go say anything at his service. So I wanted to use this opportunity to say it now. Kind of take this opportunity to do it this way to kind of give my memorial to him. We're in this coronavirus crisis right now. It's April 3rd. It's going to get worse. It's bad now. It's going to get a lot worse from what everyone's saying. I was on a call last night with some people. They say, it's probably going to, in North Carolina here, they're expecting it to peak really bad in about 2 or 3 weeks. Pretty short soon. We're on pace to have more patients than we have hospital beds. It's hopefully it won't get as bad as a lot of people fear, but we have to get realistic that it probably will. And when we look back on this, after this crisis is all done and we kind of decompress and we study it, there's going to be a lot of tragedies that we mourn, and there's going to be a lot of heroes that we have to celebrate. And for me, right at the top of the list of heroes has to be Isaac Robinson. When I first heard of his death, I said, it doesn't make any sense for him to have died from coronavirus. He wasn't elderly, everything was saying like the mortality rate on this thing is like 1 to 2%. And most of the people that are dying are older and have had health problems and had poor health care. And that's not Isaac. Isaac was, 44. He was young. He was healthy. He had a little bit of a gut, but, hey, so do I. He was healthy. And it's not as if he didn't have access to health care. He's a state rep. He could have gone and seen the best doctors in the state of Michigan anytime he wanted to. What happened? It didn't make any sense. And as I think back on Isaac's life and the kind of man he was, the kind of person he was, it actually makes perfect sense that he passed away, because he was so selfless and always thinking of others and always doing service that he didn't take care of himself. When he found out that there were people in his community suffering from coronavirus, well, what do you say when you find out people in your community have an illness, a contagious disease? The first thing you do is stay away, try to put as much distance between you as possible. That's what you're supposed to do. It's kind of common sense. But that's not what Isaac did. Isaac didn't care. Isaac found out there were people in his community who were sick with a serious illness. First thing he did was run to them to try and help them, to do everything he could. He wasn't like, oh, I'll make a phone call and send somebody else. No, he did it himself. He went there. When the last days of his life, when he was feeling sick and he was supposed to go to the hospital, he didn't go. And I know there were two big reasons why he put off going to the hospital longer than he should have. First, he was hard at work, working as a state legislator, putting in legislation and doing the work necessary to help the people that were going to be here about this crisis. He'd already, in the very early days of this crisis, he'd already put together packages of bills to, put a moratorium on evictions, to put a moratorium on utility shutoffs, to do all that. And he was working on a bill to end the waiting period for unemployment benefits and to expand who is eligible for unemployment benefits. And I know Isaac thought that he could put off going to the doctor, that he needed to put off going to the doctor because he knew that that work on that bill was so important, that he was so focused on that work that he put off till it was too late going to the hospital. The second reason I know Isaac put off going to the hospital was because he didn't want to take care, he didn't want to use up resources. He knew how hard the doctors, especially and the nurses, especially the nurses, he had so much respect for nurses and all the work that they did, and he didn't want them. He knew how busy they were, and he wanted them focusing their time on the ones that he felt needed more than he did. He didn't want the doctors and the nurses and the medical professionals focusing on him. He wanted them to help others. He didn't want to take up the precious resource of their time. He wanted their time to be spent on the more vulnerable. And that selflessness is in part what contributed to his death. And like I said, when we look back on this whole thing and we take stock of the heroes of this tragedy who helped get us through this, Isaac Robinson needs to be at the top of the list. And you're going to hear a lot about, you should hear a lot when you study Isaac's life, when you read about him, about the work he did as a legislator, the work he did fighting for labor unions throughout his adult life, everything he did. You're going to do, I want to take a few minutes to tell just like some personal stories about him. I apologize if I ramble. I know I do, but you know, I'm emotional. And I'm not a good editor. I ramble under normal circumstances, and this is probably going to be worse. But if you take your time, I'd appreciate it. I met Isaac in 2007. I met him in passing. I think I met him in passing at a Young Democrats of America conference I went to in Dallas, Texas. We didn't really, just in passing. I met a ton of people at that convention. He was just one of many. Didn't really think much of it. Where I really got to know Isaac well, though, was in November of 2007. The weekend, I looked up the date actually a few days ago. It was actually on November 17th, the weekend of November 17th. There was a big Young Democrats of America conference in New Hampshire. And this was an incredible conference because you got to remember when this was. We're talking about New Hampshire in November 2007. This is just a couple of months before the New Hampshire presidential primary. So they were star-studded. I mean, for political junkies, everyone was coming to this conference. I mean, this was not a conference to miss. Bill Clinton came to this conference. Elizabeth Edwards was there. Barack Obama's sister was there. Michael Dukakis made an appearance at one of the breakfast events. It was everything going to this conference. And I was as much as I was looking forward to the conference, I was actually a little bit disappointed because on the weekend because it was the same weekend as the Michigan-Ohio State football game. And I happen to be a big Michigan fan. And the reason even though I'm a North Carolinian, I actually didn't come to North Carolina until I was about 3 or 4 years old. I was actually born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My dad was a student at the University of Michigan in grad school when I was born. So I was actually born in Ann Arbor. And I didn't move down to North Carolina until, my dad finished grad school when I was, 3 or 4 years old. So and then I'd often go back to Michigan when I was a kid to visit relatives and family and friends and everything. So I grew up being a huge Michigan football fan. I love watching Michigan football. And this year, because the conference was the same weekend as the Michigan-Ohio State game, I was afraid I was gonna have to miss the game, or I was gonna be watching it up in New Hampshire. Well, so anyway, the first thing I do when I get to this conference is I decide to look for the delegation from Michigan to try to find some Michigan fans so that I'll have someone to watch the game with on Saturday. And the person I come across to is Isaac Robinson from Michigan. And I tell him, introduce myself, tell him, I'm looking for friends to watch the Michigan game with, and he tells me that he's a Michigan alum, he's a Michigan fan, and he definitely wants to get together and watch the game on Saturday. And we start talking, and we just immediately hit it off. And I actually tell him that, we actually have the same name, which we do. Thing about Isaac. Isaac wasn't his first name. Isaac was his middle name. His first name was William, middle name's Isaac, last name's Robinson, and he went by his middle name. And Isaac is actually one of what a lot of people don't know about me is that Isaac is actually one of my two middle names. A lot of people know my middle name is Chandran because I use the middle initial C a lot. But actually, I have two middle names. If you look at my birth certificate and my important forms of ID, I actually have two middle names. I have Chandran Isaac Thomas. I have four names. First name, two middle names, a last name. Chandran's from my mother's father. Isaac's was my dad's father. And Isaac's actually a big name in my family. My dad, his legal first name is Isaac, goes by his middle name Job, and all of his brothers do the same thing. All of his brothers, their first name is Isaac, and they all go by their middle name. So Isaac's a family name for mine. And, tell this story to Isaac, and he immediately falls in love with this, tells us that this is a sign that we're long lost relatives, which he loved to joke about. He loved to talk about how the two of us were blessed to have the coolest middle name in the world, and that it was a special bond between us. We get together, we hang out, watch the game. It was fun, even though Michigan didn't win, but, that happens. We sit around, we hit it off, we hang out that whole weekend, and weekend's good, but end of the weekend kind of shapes up to be a little bit bad for me. One of the things I do a lot of times when I go to conferences, and actually when I go to any city for anything, is I lots of times like to book a little extra time onto my travel. And the reason I like to do this is I love to travel, I love to explore different cities. And one of the things I hate is you fly across country to go to some city you've never been into, and you spend the whole couple of days there never leaving the hotel conference center. And you never get a chance to explore the city, and you never get a chance to see anything. So I always try to make a point whenever I go travel places to book in a little bit of extra time so I can go explore a little bit. And that's what I've done on this conference. I booked a flight that didn't leave until a day or two after everybody else. And at the time, at the end of the weekend, when the conference ended, it didn't look like to me like that was going to be a good idea. I was feeling kind of down. My depression, I'd had problems with depression. My depression was kind of flaring up. There were a few friends in New Hampshire that I was hoping to meet up with when I was there. That kind of fell through. We had a little bit of an argument. Had some problems with my professional life at that time, and I was just in a bad mood, and I was just feeling depressed, and I was anxious to get home, and I was dreading, but I was telling myself I was an idiot because I booked my flight out, for a day or two later, and while everyone else was going to be going home, I was going to be stuck in New Hampshire for an extra day or two, just sitting alone in my hotel room. And this has me down, and I'm frustrated and everything, but I'm depressed. And luckily, a friend helps me out, a good friend, Peter Lynn Marcus, is hanging out with me. I think he sees that I'm a little depressed and stuff, so he invites me to, tells me if I'm coming up an extra day to come up, stay with him at his place in Boston, because he was staying in Boston, which was not that far a drive away from where we were staying in Manchester. And I was like, listen, really? Are you serious? Because I wasn't sure if he was just, throwing that out as a, courtesy type thing. But it was like, Peter was like, no, seriously, come up to Boston, stay with us. You can crash at my place. I'll show you around Boston. We'll have a blast. And I just lit up because this was a real lifeline for me. I mean, I was worried about being stuck here, locked up in a hotel room with nothing to do for, an extra day or two. But now my friend Peter comes, I'm going to get a chance to go to Boston. I'm going to be able to crash at his place, going to visit the city, start putting this together. Found out another good friend of mine, Jonathan Padilla, is actually started his freshman year. He's at Harvard. So we talked to him and said, yeah, we're going to be able to go stay at Peter's house, and then go over to Harvard, hook up with Jonathan and have him show us around and everything. So I'm like, this is great. I get to hang out with Peter. I get to hang out with Jonathan, everything. I'm looking forward to it. And check out my hotel room. I tell Peter, hey, I'll drive up to meet you in a little bit. Before I go, I have to talk to Isaac because I promised him that I'd give him a ride to the airport before I left. I had a rental car that weekend. Isaac didn't, so told Isaac he didn't need to get a cab to the airport. I'd take him. So I tell Peter, like, Peter, I'll meet up with you in a little bit. I just have to go give Isaac a ride to the airport. I'll drop him off to the airport. Then I'll head up, meet you in Boston. So I go up to Isaac's room. We're sitting in his hotel, sitting in his room, his hotel in Manchester. And he's getting ready to check out. And he asked me, when my flight is and everything. He's looking at his flight info, asked me when my flight is. And I tell him, oh yeah, no, I'm staying an extra day or two. That's booked up. And he's like, oh, you're just staying here? He's like, no, I'm actually going to drive up to Boston and see Peter. I'm going to stay at his place. You're going to have a lot of fun. And you're going to go over to, yeah, 2 months, we're going to go over to Harvard. We're going to see Jonathan. JP is going to show us around Harvard. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. I see Isaac sitting there in his room. He's like, wait a second. You're not going home. You're going to go out to Boston, like, party with Peter and Jonathan? No. He's like, I'm like, yeah. I was like, man, that sounds like a lot of fun. It's like, I'd like to do that too. It'd be okay if I join you. I was like, heck yeah, come on, join us. We'll be funny. I know Peter. Peter's like the most generous guy in the world. He won't mind. And sure enough, I call Peter. Peter's like, bring him along. That'd be great. And Isaac's like, man, I got my flight, but I want to join you guys, but I got my flight. My flight is leaving soon, he's like, all right, I'll tell you what, I'll push back my flight. So he goes online, he changes the reservations, he pushes his full flight back to the next day. But then he says he's got a problem. He's got to explain this to his girlfriend. Because his girlfriend, the girl he was seeing at the time, was expecting him back in Detroit. So Isaac's like, I got it. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call up my girlfriend. I'm going to tell her that I screwed up, missed my flight, that they can't get me on another flight, and I'm stuck here an extra day. This is what I'm going to do. This is going to work. He's like, yeah, it's going to work. So Isaac picks up his cell phone, dials. His girlfriend picks up. And Isaac's like, yeah, baby, hey, how's it going? It's me. I'm sorry, baby. I screwed up. I missed my flight. They can't get me on another one. I'm going to be stuck here an extra day. I'm real sorry. I'm sorry. I know I was supposed to be back today. I'm sorry I screwed up. And his girlfriend's on the other line, on the other end. His girlfriend says to him, I thought your flight was leaving at 2:30. And I was like, yeah, my flight was scheduled to leave at 2:30. And his girlfriend's like, it's 1 o'clock now. How do you miss a 2:30 flight when it's only 1 o'clock now? And I was like, well, I'm running really late. He's backtracking all of it to get his way out of it. But that was funny. I'm not telling it right, but it was hilarious at the time. But anyway, we go up, we drive up to Boston together, stay at Peter's place. He's got this really cool place in Chinatown that he just moved into. We go over to Harvard. Jonathan shows us all around. He gives us a tour of Harvard. We see the Statue of the Three Lies. He shows us the dorm where Kennedy stayed when Kennedy was a student at Harvard. Takes us to this I think it was a pizza place called Pinocchio's, actually. Go there, grab some food. Jonathan tells us great stories about a run-in he had that previous day with Tom Tancredo. It was a congressman from California. I'll let Jonathan tell that story. You can ask him. He'll tell it better than I can. And just a great time. Hanging out with Peter, hanging out with Jonathan, hanging out with Isaac. Just an absolutely great weekend. I was so thankful that I had booked that extra couple of days to stay in Boston. So incredible trip. We go home. Conference ends. We all go home, and from then on, afterwards, Isaac and I just hung out all the time. Anytime we got together at any of these conferences, I'd go to conferences. I'd make a point of going to as many of these conferences as I could. For half the reason was to hang out with my friends, guys like Peter, like Jonathan, guys like Isaac, and we'd go to conferences together all the time. Louisville, everywhere. Louisville, Chicago, different places. I've lost track of them. And one of the places where we hung out a lot was the 2008 convention, DNC convention in Colorado. That was that was Barack Obama's first presidential election, 2008. And the convention that year was in Denver. And we had went out there. We didn't stay in the same hotel. I was staying with the North Carolina delegation. He was staying with the Michigan delegation. But we still met up just about every day of the convention, one point or another, and hung out. Same thing, Peter. I can't remember if you were saying with Jonathan, but he was actually rooming with me. So kind of had the same group together throughout the convention. And last day of the convention, we did the same thing that I usually do. Like I told you, I like to book a couple of days on extra days on the end so I get to explore a little bit. And Peter and Isaac had done the same thing. So last day of the convention, everyone else flies out. We got a couple extra days, so we get a rental car. Isaac had gotten a rental car because he got tired of dealing with the shuttles. And a couple of other friends. Isaac has a couple of other friends of his from Michigan. And we just drive up into the mountains and spend a day, hanging out, because that was the thing. Although we had this great time in Denver, the thing about Denver, we're still stuck in the city. Denver, if you've ever been, get on the car, drive 30 minutes out of town, and you're in the middle of the most beautiful Rocky Mountains you've ever been in. So we got a chance to go around and do this. And things on that trip I remember this was right after we just received word that day that John McCain had picked Sarah Palin as his vice presidential nominee. And I'm political savvy, but I'll tell you, at that time, I had never heard of Sarah Palin. I'll be straight with you. I had not heard. We heard rumors that McCain was thinking about picking a few different people. We've heard rumors that he was thinking about picking Joe Lieberman as his VP or Tim Pawlenty from Minnesota. And when somebody said Palin, I thought, you must have misheard. You must mean Pawlenty. He was one there sometimes. Like, no, Palin. And none of us, I had no idea who this was. A couple of us, but we're at a restaurant one time, and Isaac decides to take a video of getting people's reaction of Senator McCain's vice presidential pick. If anyone has this video, by the way, if anyone finds this, I'm pretty sure he uploaded it online. I've been doing a deep dive online last couple of days trying to find all of Isaac's social media posts, because he made a ton of them. If anyone finds these videos, I'd appreciate it. It would mean a lot to look at this again. But Isaac's taking videos, going around the table, us trying to get our reaction to his picking, to McCain's picking Sarah Palin. And I'm, trying to be Mr. Political, Mr. Cautious. I don't know what to say. So I'm like, I'll be honest, I don't know if this is a good pick or a bad pick. I just don't know much about this person. I don't know much about her record. I can't really comment on whether it's a good pick or a bad pick because I don't have enough information. And trying to give a good political neutral answer. And honestly, it was also the truth because I didn't know anything. Well, Isaac gets in front of the camera, and Isaac says, like, well, I don't need time to decide. I already know this pick is stupid. It's like, I looked at this background. She was mayor of this town called Wasilla that had less than 10,000 people. When I was in student government, when I was a student at Michigan and Northwestern, I had friends who were head of student government associations bigger than that town. They're more qualified to be president than she is. And, it was a little thing, but it was one of those things that was actually kind of a surprising insight. It was one of those things that, people didn't really think about at that time. But yeah, that was actually, there were SGA presidents that headed up towns larger than what Sarah Palin had been mayor of in Alaska. And I've actually broken that line out lots of times over the years. I was on the conference call last night with a young man who was president of the senior class at Chapel Hill, and I found him besides Chapel Hill. I was like, you're head of a larger group than a lot of the mayors of some of these small towns in North Carolina. When I do a lot of political work here in the area of Charlotte, North Carolina, and sometimes I was talking to some of the people who work in like the SGA and stuff at UNC Charlotte, and I was like, actually, some of those SGA people got more votes than some of the people in Charlotte City Council in some of those primary elections. It's interesting. It's a little insight. So if you ever hear me talking about how many votes SGA candidates get and comparing them to elected officials, I first got that from Isaac. Another thing I remember that trip that was noteworthy, there was one time we were hanging out in this restaurant. I think it might have been like some sort of a rest stop or something. And we run into, and Isaac strikes up a conversation. There were a few international students there from China. And Isaac, of course, strikes up a conversation with them and becomes friendly, trades social media handles. They can follow each other on social media, and they're talking. And, it's just kind of the way Isaac was. Isaac could, make friends with anybody, just sit him there and talk. And he'd go up perfect strangers and become friends with them. Just amazing. And there's one thing in that conversation, though, that I remember as noteworthy. While he was talking to these international students from China, it came up in conversation that Isaac, as I mentioned earlier, been a graduate of the University of Michigan, but had also been a graduate of Northwestern Law School. And a couple of people, when they heard that Isaac had graduated from Northwestern Law, they really perked up because they know that's a big deal. I mean, Northwestern Law is one of the top law schools in the country. It is ridiculously hard to get into. It's ridiculously crazy prestigious. You know, lawyers, graduates from there go to top corporate practice, and you know, this is actually something Isaac could rightly be proud of. But Isaac just shrugged it off and dismissed, Northwestern Law, it's no big deal. You know, it's all great inflation. You know, you can just when you went to Northwestern Law, I could just write crap on a piece of paper and they would give it a B because they just assumed if you got in there you were smart, so they just gave you good grades for nothing. And you just and it doesn't seem like much at the time, but when I think back about that, Isaac wasn't. I actually think it's very noteworthy and very significant because not because Isaac was dissing Northwestern Law, and any of you Northwestern Law School grads out there, he wasn't trying to diss, but Isaac, it was very easy to forget with his big personality just how brilliant and how intelligent he was. And at the same time, how humble he was about it. Isaac wasn't, and as I do more work in education, I realize this. Isaac wasn't just book smart. He was very, very book smart. You can't go to Michigan, you can't go to Northwestern Law without having some IQ points behind you. But Isaac had a wisdom beyond just being book smart. Isaac wasn't just book smart. Isaac's wisdom allowed him to understand that being book smart wasn't that important. That being book smart didn't mean that much, didn't mean as much as a lot of people tend to think it does. Isaac knew that just because he had those paper credentials, just because he had that degree from the University of Michigan and that degree from Northwestern Law School, Isaac knew that those credentials didn't necessarily mean he was any smarter or better than a custodian, than somebody who worked in lawn care, than somebody who was working in a factory, that somebody who was working minimum wage at a fast food place. Isaac knew, didn't say, Isaac knew that those paper credentials didn't matter. He knew that that wasn't what made him smart. He never bragged about that, which is amazing because a lot of people, we all know those people, who graduate from prestigious schools and love to work it into conversations. They love to name drop. They love to say, when I was at such and such school, or when I was graduating from this thing, or that was one of the things I wanted to, all those. Isaac was the exact opposite. Isaac never bragged about his paper credentials. It was, I think probably most of the people who knew him, a lot of the people who knew him probably didn't even realize that, because he didn't care about those paper credentials that he had. And he also never exploited it. That was the thing. Isaac worked as a labor organizer. He worked for the Teamsters as a political director. Most people who go to prestigious law schools, like that, first thing they do is they go out inevitably and they go to big corporate law firms where they make loads of cash. And Isaac could have done that. Isaac easily could have done that as a graduate of Northwestern. He could have, and with all the political ties he had, he easily could have gone and made a lot of money as a corporate lawyer, but that's not what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to work in the labor movement. He wanted to work serving people. To him, that's what life was about. That's what he wanted to do. I know he never gave it a second thought taking a corporate law job. That would never have been his thing, even though he easily could have done it. So I tell that story about 2008 convention. Going forward, we keep hanging out, we keep being friends. 2009, he decides to run for one of the vice presidential slots with Young Democrats of America. And I'm, of course, hey, Isaac, you're running for vice president, you're running for one of the VP slots, I got your vote. Man, I got your vote, I'm supporting you. And that race was actually a little bit tricky. because that race, I remember, I actually had a little bit of static that year. There was actually some drama in that race because Isaac wasn't the only friend of mine who was running for an office in Young Democrats of America that year. Good friend Mark Newman was running for treasurer, and my good friend Zach Hawkins was running for one of the other vice presidential slots. Luckily, he wasn't running against Isaac, so I didn't have to choose, but he was running for one of the other vice presidential slots. So obviously, Mark, Zach, I told them both, and I meant it. I was supporting both of you, voting for both of you, doing it. My friend Monica Talmadge, this caused a little bit of tension between us. Monica, if you're watching this, hold on, I'm going to explain this. But Monica was our delegation chair that year, and Monica was really insistent that everyone from North Carolina endorse Mark and endorse Zach because those were the two candidates from North Carolina, and I was 100% on board with that. But she also said that we needed to remain neutral in all of the other races. All of the other races with all the other candidates, we needed to stay neutral. And I told her, Monica, sorry, just to let you know, Monica, that's cool policy, but me personally, just one race I'm not staying neutral in. My friend Isaac's running. I'm supporting him and I'm endorsing him. My Monica's like, no, Vinod, you got to stay neutral. We're supporting Mark, we're supporting Zach, neutral in all of the races. And I politely explained to her that race I couldn't stay neutral because I had to support Isaac. And this caused a little bit of tension between us. And, we went back and forth a little bit. Monty, I'm not sure if you remember that, but works out. Isaac ends up winning one of the VP slot that he was running for, which was great. And the funny thing about this is, I've talked to Monica since Isaac's death, but I never talked to Monica after this, but I'm almost positive that looking back on it years later, Monica now understands why I was so stubborn on that point. I know at the time she was slapping herself in the head, not wondering why I was being so stubborn and why I refused to stay neutral. Because she didn't know Isaac at the time, but since then she did. She got to know Isaac. Luckily, she was one of the lucky people who got to know Isaac very well. After he got elected to be vice president, Monica worked with him a lot. And Monica will tell you that Isaac had a very, very profound impact on her life. And Monica got to love Isaac the same way that I did. And she didn't realize it at that time back in 2009 when she was trying to convince me to stay neutral in the race. But I know that thinking back on it now, looking back on all these years, I know she's going to shake her head and I know she's going to be like, yeah, Vinod, I understand now. Now that she got to know Isaac, she understands why I was so stubborn and had to support him that year in Chicago. And I remember that Chicago convention well. There was another that we were busy that whole weekend, trying to whip votes for the candidates we like. One significant story I got to tell about that convention in Chicago before we managed to get him elected as VP. We were in a labor caucus meeting. These different groups have different breakout rooms, and Isaac at the time was chair of the labor caucus, and we have this labor caucus meeting. It's a crowded room. This conference hotel in Chicago. We're sitting there, and while Isaac's giving a speech at the front, and in the middle of Isaac's talk, this random man walks in to the room. No one knows who he is, what he is. And turns out he's either low income or homeless. I think he's homeless. And he interrupts Isaac's speech to ask for spare change, to ask if anyone has money to give him. This guy just walks in off the street. And the woman that was sitting next to me, I was sitting close, and the woman that was sitting next to me, I remember she grabbed my hand and squeezed it. And she told me afterwards what happened was she was terrified. She thought that this was like some, lone gunman coming in to be a mass shooter to try to rob all of us or do something. She thought that this guy was going to go crazy and hurt everybody. Isaac didn't bat an eye. When this guy walked in the middle of his speech and interrupted his speech, asked for spare change, he's like, yeah, sure, we got you. Hold up, guys. Hey, and he asks everybody, and he gets a collection going of everybody in the room, and he gives money himself out of his own pocket to this guy who just walked in off the street and interrupted his speech. And Isaac doesn't bat an eye. And the guy started to get like a little embarrassed about asking for money. And Isaac was like, dude, don't be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. Isaac comes over, gives him a hug, and is like, hey, we got a minister here. You know, he's going to pray for you. We got you. We got you. And that was just so Isaac. You know, like he had to be there. But, you know, you see this politician giving a speech, and a homeless person walks in and interrupts and asks for money. And Isaac doesn't bat an eye, just does everything he can to help that person. That's just the way he was. And yeah, that was just so Isaac, that moment right there. Go ahead, you know, over the next few years, that was in 2009. Over the next few years, you know, kept meeting at conferences, kept hanging out. 2012 convention rolls around in Charlotte. We have a great time in Charlotte because I was looking forward to that because Charlotte, that's right where I live, you know. So I called up Isaac before the convention. I was like, I need to make sure you're coming down here. I can't wait to show you my hometown. You got to come down here. So, you know, Isaac comes in. We spend the whole convention running around like playing phone tag with each other. So we don't see each other much. He was working for John Conyers at the time. And, you know, he tells me he's busy working around with Conyers and, you know, this and that. And I was running around doing different stuff for the North Carolina delegation. And then we finally meet up and we were hanging out and been looking to meet up with this guy. And he immediately starts taking pictures because that's Isaac. And we start catching up with everything. He introduces me to Congressman Conyers. We talk about different things. We catch up. I think Coleman was there. Coleman from Kentucky was there. Gave a couple of interviews for the media. We got some pictures with that. Bill Clinton was during I think it was during Bill Clinton's speech. I gave up my credentials to somebody else so that they could. There was a friend of mine who really wanted to catch Bill Clinton's speech, but the convention hall was really crowded, so I let him borrow my credentials to go. And I'm sitting out in the hallway with Isaac, and I remember he takes a couple of pictures of us, and he gets excited, and he shows me the picture. And he's like, "No, this is the picture." He's like, "This is iconic." And I was like, "What is it?" It was like the two of us standing by, you know, in the hallway at the DNC convention. That was, you know, both of us like looking down at our cell phones, and he's like, or something, or like talking to each other, and he's like, "This picture, this is the cool," and it was a great shot. It was like the behind the scenes guys doing the work while everyone else is doing. This is a great picture, and it was a great picture, and I've been looking all over for it. I can't find it. If anybody finds it on one of Isaac's social media sites, let me know. I'd love to have that picture. That was it, but 2012 was great. And after that, for the next few years, Isaac and I didn't see each other as much as I would have liked. You know, we both aged out of Young Dems. We still kept in touch on social media. Anytime he ran for office, I'd, you know, made sure to send him some money, send him some encouraging words, that sort of thing. He didn't come to the convention in 2016. I was really hoping. I went to the DNC convention in 2016 in Philadelphia. I was really hoping to see him there. He didn't go, so I missed out on that. You know, so I was doing it. So kind of didn't see each other for a while until last year, 2019, just a few months ago, November 2019. As I told you before at the beginning, I'm a big Michigan football fan, and for years, I'd always wanted to go to one of the items on my bucket list was to go to a Michigan-Ohio State football game in Michigan. Always wanted to do this, been putting it off for years, always wanted to do this. This year was the year. 2019 was the year. My dad, an old friend of my dad's, gifted him 2 tickets. And we were able to get, and so this was the year. We lucked into these 2 tickets. We were like, okay, you know, this was the year we're going. And decided to go up to Ann Arbor, visit everything, you know, visit everybody, you know, see some old relatives, see some old sites that we hadn't been to in a long time. I hadn't been to since I was a kid. And we go up there and I decide, okay, I need to get in touch with Isaac. If I'm going to be in Ann Arbor, just very close to Detroit, just a real short drive from Detroit, I have to call up Isaac. We got to meet up. We got to get together. And I was actually a little nervous about reaching out to him to let him know I was coming. And I know that might seem weird, like, well, this is one of my best friends. Why am I nervous about letting him know that I'm coming into town? And the reason I was a little nervous about letting him know was because I was afraid I was dreading that I might get the brush off. I was dreading, I hadn't seen him in a few years. It didn't feel like a few years, but it had been. And I was worried that Isaac might respond like, "Oh my God, this is a guy I haven't seen in years, and he's coming into town wanting to meet up, whatever." And also, Isaac had gotten big by this time. Isaac had just been elected state rep. He's an elected official. He's a big deal. And I thought, he's like didn't want to be pestered by this guy that he used to know from years ago. And but I reach out to him anyway. I send him a message on Facebook, and I'm hoping that he's not going to give me a brush off. But I'm prepared for it. It was the exact opposite. He did not give me a brush off. I sent him the Facebook message, a message on Facebook. Within a few minutes, I get a response back, and Isaac's like, "We need to meet up when you come to town. We need to. Let me know when you're coming into town. Let me know where you're staying. Let me know your schedule when you're here so I can plan when to meet you. We have to meet up." And I was so excited that he didn't brush me off like this. And he's calling me up. He's like, and he's sending me messages leading up. He's like, "Do you have your passport? If you have a passport, bring it, because I might want to take you up to show you stuff in Canada." It's going crazy. So I'm excited. I get to see Isaac. He's not only is he not brushing me off, he's genuinely excited. So, and so am I. So that was November 30th. It was a Saturday. We went, my dad, my sister, we went to the Michigan game that afternoon. Then I leave them off back at the hotel. I drive up to Detroit to meet up with Isaac. And that night is incredible. He takes me to these great restaurants to eat. He takes me to these clubs. He takes me like two different jazz clubs. He shows me around his district. It's just amazing. We joke around about everything. He tells me about what's going on as a state legislator. Just one of the best nights, and some of the coolest experiences too. I'll always remember from that night. He takes me to this jazz club, and there is one of the original singers from Motown was performing, and he points out to me, and there's this other older gentleman sitting there eating at one of the tables, and as he points it out and introduces me to him, is like, "That's Billy Davis. He is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the first time Jimi Hendrix ever played the electric guitar was when that man handed it to him." And I was like, "You have to be kidding me." He's like, "No, that's real." And later in that night, we get to sit there, and he introduced me to Billy Davis, and Billy Davis is interested when he finds out I'm from the South, because he was from the South as well. He was from Mississippi. And we start talking, and he starts telling me about what it was like in the days of segregation, having to go through tours of the South, what it was like, about how he always went through North Carolina, during doing on tours during his performing days, during his touring days, I should say. And we were talking about that, and Isaac takes a couple of pictures of us, and I remember thinking that had to be one of the coolest experiences in my life. I'm sitting there in a jazz club in Detroit, sitting at a counter eating banana pudding with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as he's telling me stories about what it was like touring in North Carolina during the days of segregation. The history that this man was imparting onto me in that moment. And I do have some great pictures of that. But that's the type of experiences you had with Isaac. A lot of people might not brush past that and not realize how significant that was, but Isaac was there, and Isaac realized how significant it was and knew that I would realize how significant it was, so we made sure to do that. And that was an amazing experience. We did a lot of other things that night. Showed me around Detroit, told me about what it was like as a freshman legislator, in Michigan, showed me some of the districts, and two things really stand out to me because I think they kind of foreshadowed Isaac's death. He pointed out to me, and he showed to me one of the senior centers where he spent a lot of time that was in his district, and how much he worked with the seniors there. And I'm not sure, I haven't confirmed this yet, but looking back on it, I think that was one of the places, I think that might have been the thing. There was a good chance, talking to people, that was where he actually contracted his coronavirus, was that he found out it was one of the seniors there that had it. and he went there to help, and that's where he contracted it himself. The other story that I remember from that night was when told him that I was staying in Ann Arbor, and I asked him if he went back to visit Michigan anymore since it was his alma mater. He said no, but well, he said he didn't make it up there much, but he said he'd just been there a couple of months ago because he'd found out that they weren't giving good working conditions for the nurses at the medical center. So he said he had to go there and read the riot act to the Board of Regents. And that was something, in the middle, we're now in the middle of this crisis, and now a lot of people are realizing how the great work that nurses do in the medical profession. And a lot of people are realizing now, Isaac didn't just realize it now, Isaac knew it a long time ago. And Isaac wasn't shy about going in and being rude to the Board of Regents at the University of Michigan if he needed to. He went in there and he put up that fight for them. Another story from that night, Isaac was telling me about how he was a freshman in the legislature, and he was telling me that a couple of the other members were getting annoyed with him for ruffling feathers. And Isaac tells me, he's like, yeah, this one of the senior members of the leadership called him in and gave him a talking to because it told Isaac that Isaac was using foul language. I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't use foul language on the floor. He's like, yes, you did. He's like, you refer to this other member, you refer to him as an ass. It's like, you called another member an ass. You cannot use vulgar language like that. And Isaac looks at me and is like, I told him, I didn't call him an ass. I called him a punk ass bitch. That's different. That's not the same thing. Again, guy of Isaac didn't care about ruffling feathers at all. Not if it meant standing up for the little guy, not if it meant standing up for people who didn't have a voice for themselves. That was Isaac, the always fighting for the little guy, fighting for working with politicians that other people respect but avoid because they think that they'll never win. He worked with guys like Dennis Kucinich, Bernie Sanders. A lot of people were like, when everyone else was telling them, oh, these guys can't win, they're going to lose, don't waste your time with them. Isaac campaigned with them, okay? Isaac did everything he could because to him, it was all about the fight. I'm going to wrap this up now. I know I've dragged on way too long. I apologize. But, I talked to Isaac. I made a point after that trip of not letting it go as many years again before we met again. I talked to him about trying to get together in Milwaukee this summer. Last month I actually thought about going up to see him. It was the weekend after Super Tuesday for their primary, the Michigan primary, because I know he was working hard on that race for some candidates, and I thought about going up there, and unfortunately I couldn't work it out because I'd just been so swamped with stuff, and I really regret not going up there now. I tried to get him to promise that he was going to come to the convention in Milwaukee this summer. He said wasn't sure if he could because he was going to be up for re-election and have a primary, and he might have to stay and campaign. I told him one of two things. If you don't have an opponent, you have to come to Milwaukee for the convention. If you do have an opponent, then the week after Milwaukee, I'm coming to Detroit and I'm going to campaign for you. He was like, yes. And we had that plan set in stone. We were going to see each other this summer, either in Milwaukee or in Detroit or both. And that was the plan. And I was already looking forward to it. That was one of the big things. And then this past Sunday, about 10 o'clock at night, it was March 29th, sitting at home, my phone rings. I look down at my phone, and I see the caller ID says it's Monica Talmadge, who I mentioned earlier. Dear friend of mine, and see her, it's 10 o'clock at night, I'm figuring, okay, yeah, call her. I mean, we talk a lot, we still are active, we on a couple of councils and committees together, so I figured she's calling up to say something about that. So I call her up, so I pick up the phone, tells her how she's doing, and she says, I'm not doing well, Vinod. I was like, well, it's like, we lost Isaac. And I'm confused. Isaac who? Because I was like, the only Isaac, and she's like, Isaac from Detroit. Like, the only Isaac from Detroit I know is Isaac Robinson. There's no way it's him. I mean, I don't know what Isaac you're talking about, because like I said, the only Isaac I know about is Isaac Robinson, and he's not dead, so I don't know who you're talking about. And she's like, yeah, it is Isaac Robinson. And I kind of just don't know how to react to Monica. And I was like, Monica, she tells me he had the coronavirus and he put off going till it was too late. And I remember thinking, damn it, Isaac, that's exactly what you would do. And I sat there and I told Monica on the other line, Monica, this isn't true. I know what you're saying to me. I know I hear the words coming out of your mouth. I know you're not a liar. I know you're saying this, but that can't be true. Isaac can't be gone. I just saw him a couple of months ago. I've been following him on social media. He's been posting on social media every day about how he's fighting to get aid to the people who are suffering from the coronavirus. He's not dead. He's doing work now. And I couldn't accept it. And I told her I just need a minute. And it still hasn't clicked completely with me that he's gone. And I don't know if I ever will click with me that he's gone. What he meant to me, the fact that somebody that cool, liked me kind of, it actually, that I got to spend time with this man, this person, that he allowed me into his circle, that when I called him up, he didn't brush me off. He was excited to see me. That's, I can't, like I said, I'm not a poet. The words escape me for how much this hurts, for how much I'm going to miss my friend. When this whole tragedy is over, we need to make sure that we remember the heroes. And Isaac Robinson's one of those heroes. I know I bored, for those, I'm not sure how much of this you watched. I know I bored you with a lot of stories. Crazy thing is, I left out a lot. There are a lot of stories I left out. If you ever want to hear more Isaac stories, more stories about the fights that he had with state party chairs, with congressmen, with whoever. He never compromised. He never compromised. He always fought that. He was the best of us. He was brilliant, but he was transcended brilliant. He was, as I said earlier, he was smart enough to know that his paper credentials didn't matter. He was amazing, and I just want, I heard today that his mom's sick now and is in the ICU. I traded messages. I'm trying to find out. I'm praying for her. I'm praying for the family, but I know that I will always miss Isaac. He's always going to be just a huge part of me. And when this whole crisis is over, we need to make sure we don't forget heroes like him who helped get us through it. And thank you for watching however much of this you were able to watch. I appreciate it. And for all of those of you who knew Isaac, I know you join me in grief, and we'll make it through this together. We'll make it through it together. Take care.